I can remember standing there, and the only thing that I could think of, the only thing running through my mind was, does he know that this gun is loaded? Does he know how hard I've worked to get here? And does he know that I have a daughter on the way? And I pulled out my gun and I put it on the table in front of him. I took off my badge and I put it on the table. And I walked back to the locker room and I felt like this failure. This guy had been given this chance to be a police officer and I screwed it up. How stupid. I was so mad at myself. I walked back to the locker room and I punched the locker as hard as I could, trying to break my hand. And I sat down, and I remember thinking how I just wanted my daughter to be proud of me. Like I wanted her to one day look up at me with those proud eyes, just proud that her dad was this police officer. She was proud of who he was. But I'd ruined it. And these thoughts that were running through my head were really familiar because I dealt with feelings like this all of my life. Not being good enough or not fitting in. I can remember when I was in the 5th grade, my mom taking me to school. And we just got this blue 1966 Chevy Malibu. And it was donated to us by our church. And it wasn't pretty. It was pretty ugly. And the back end was rusted out, and it had this black vinyl top that was coming off, and it would flap in the wind when you would drive. And my parents were amazing parents, really good people. And my dad worked tirelessly as a machinist to give us a good life. But we didn't have a lot of money. And we lived in a really bad area of San Bernardino, California. I remember our house had been broken into several times. My dad had actually been shot at in front of our house by somebody trying to break into one of our cars. He used to put this thick piece of plexiglass on my top bunk because he was worried that shots fired off in the middle of the night might come through the roof and hit me in my sleep. One of my earliest memories is my dad actually grabbing me and dragging me out of my bed in the middle of a drive-by shooting. So there was no way that my mom was going to let me walk to school that day. So we were driving the car, and I remember seeing my friends out there on the playground playing, and I didn't want them to see me, so I started to slide down in my seat a little bit. And as we came to a stop, my mom went to shut off the car because the car didn't have a muffler. And it was, I don't know if you know what that sounds like, a car driving down the road without a muffler, but kind of like a tank. And she shut off the car, but the car didn't die. It just kept rumbling. Like there was fuel caught in the carburetor or something. It's something that old cars did sometimes. And I went to get out, and just as I got out, I shut the door, and boom, this huge backfire goes off. And I didn't even want to look up. And I could feel all my friends on the playground looking my direction. And as I walked onto the playground, I had this feeling of being worthless and not good enough, not as good as my friends that were on the playground. And I hated that feeling. I hated it. And I think going through that experience of being let go as a police officer and reliving those insecurities let me know that I needed to find a new way to treat those experiences and those feelings. And that's what I set out to do. In 1993, my friend Charles and I watched the very first Ultimate Fighting Championship. Now, I don't know if anybody have seen the UFC. Anybody here? Yeah. We watched the very first Ultimate Fighting Championship, and this guy, Royce Gracie, a Brazilian guy, 170 pounds, walks in the ring. He fights 3 guys that night, and he beats all 3 of them. Now, he's smaller than every single one of these guys, so I don't know if it was the insecurities of me of being too short or too small or whatever that was, but I knew I had to start training with this guy. So a week later, Charles and I are in Torrance, California, training with Hoist Gracie and his brother Horian. And training became an important part of my life after that. Around 1997, we started to notice how many shirts these guys were selling. The Gracies were selling all these shirts, I should know, I had every single one of them. But they were really just a basic design. It was a circle with a triangle and two like stick figures in it, kind of, looking like they're about ready to fight. And I think it was because they were like a conversational piece. Like anytime you wore this shirt and you walked around the city, somebody would come up to you and go, "Hey, is that guy, that Gracie dude, the Brazilian guy?" You're like, yeah, I trained with him. Yeah, I trained with him. But the problem with the shirt was that if you trained with the Gracies, you couldn't really wear a Ken Shamrock Lion Den shirt. Or if you trained with Ken Shamrock, you couldn't wear a Machado shirt. So we started to think, what if we created a shirt that anybody could wear, that was more neutral and stood more for the sport as a whole, mixed martial arts? And that one idea led us to create our company with the little money that we had. And we called it TapouT. One of the first shows we ever sold at, or the first show we ever sold at, was this small show in San Bernardino at the local YMCA. And there were two mats set up, and we had our 3x3 table, and we had set up 4 shirts, and we had like 12 of each shirt. And we were super excited to sell our clothes for the first time. But about halfway through the event, we realized we hadn't sold anything yet. And the disappointment started to set in. And then this guy, John Lewis, in the back of the room, he walked up to the event, and everybody knew who he was. He was a UFC fighter. And he walked up to our table, and he actually bought 2 shirts, and he put one on. And he started walking around the event after that. And then another guy comes up and buys a shirt, and another guy buys a shirt, and another guy buys a shirt. And then by the end of the show, we had sold all of our shirts. And we realized that one guy wearing our shirt around is what sold the rest of our shirts. So we set out to go find other UFC fighters that we could get in our clothing by paying them a few $100s to wear the shirts and our shorts on the show when they actually fought. See, nobody was doing that at the time. Everybody does it now, but nobody was doing it then. Now looking back, I could have left halfway through that show. The feelings to do that were there, but I didn't. And if I would have never realized that first sale or the potential for that first sale. Around that time, I had a conversation with my parents about what we were doing. And now, I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with your parents about quitting your job to start a t-shirt company while you're getting a bunch of tattoos, but it didn't go very well. But it actually wasn't because of my parents. My parents are really good people, and they would never tell me that I couldn't do something. They would never tell me that I don't have the ability to get something done. But like any parents that love their kids, they just want the best for them. And they don't want them to be disappointed. So there was some talk of reality. And reality meant to me was, who are you, Dan? But some guy who wasn't even good enough to be a cop. And now you want to go start a business? And you don't have any money? And what kind of business experience do you really have? You see, up until that point, the only successful companies to come out of San Bernardino was McDonald's in the 1940s and the Hells Angels, if you want to call them a company. And see, I didn't want to be like this. I didn't want to feel like this. I wanted to be one of those confident guys that everybody looks up to, that I looked up to. But I was battling insecurities in here. started reading everything I could find on successful people and people that I had looked up to, guys like Walt Disney and Tony Robbins, and probably the most confident guy that I'd come across at that time, Donald Trump. And the more I read, the more I found that these guys were as insecure as I was. And I even found something that said that insecurities was a trait of overachievers. The difference, though, is that these guys actually got past all their insecurities. And I wanted to know how they did that. Guys like Walt Disney, who had been fired from a job for lacking imagination and good ideas. We know he got past those. In fact, they became his biggest strengths. You see, most people, when they come up against an insecurity, they stop in their tracks. They stopped pressing on the gas. But what these guys did is they pushed on the gas even harder. When they had this fear of failure, they would overcompensate with great ideas and new innovations. Once I learned that, I became that person. I started, when I felt like I had this fear of failure, I became this person that overcompensated with marketing. I became this marketing maniac where I had to have my logo on everything. I would read books to try to better myself. In 2005, the UFC came to us, the owners of the UFC, and said they were going to do a reality show called The Ultimate Fighter. And we knew we had to be on this show. We had to get our stuff on there. Our fighter, Chuck Liddell, was going to be one of the coaches on the show. So Chuck was letting us crash on his couch in Vegas. And we would get up every single night at like midnight and go to the Ultimate Fighter gym, and we'd get our shirts and we'd stuff them inside the mailbox, the little tiny slot in the door, hoping that the fighters got them the next day and would pick them up and put them on and wear them on the show. And Chuck doesn't even know this, but he will now. We used to wash Chuck Liddell's clothes for him, and we would only wash his TapouT stuff. Now, I don't know if you know what Chuck looks like, but he has this mohawk and kind of this menacing look. And I remember him looking into his closet, probably wondering, where all my clothes go? But he always had a bunch of TapouT stuff to wear. Now, at the end of the filming of The Ultimate Fighter, they had the big finale. And the finale was for two fighters that were going to win a $100,000 contract with the UFC. Now, the day of the show, I'm sitting here, my partner Charles and my partner Scrape is here, Chuck Liddell's here, and we're sitting front row at the fight. And I can't explain to you the electricity in the show, but everybody in the place knew something crazy was about to happen. And I had to have our logo on everything. I was on the fighter, and I was on the fighter's parents, and I was on the ring, and we even had this 10-second spot that was going to air on television. And then the main event was about to happen, and two guys walked into the ring, Stephan Bonner and Forrest Griffin, and these guys started to fight their hearts out. Back and forth, neither of them giving up anything, and the crowd's going crazy, and they're all standing up, refusing to sit down, and at one point, Dana White, the president of the UFC, comes back to Chuck Liddell, and he whispers in his ear, Chuck, there's 10 million people watching this fight right now. Now, up until then, most UFCs had about maybe 200,000 people watch a pay-per-view event, and now there's 10 million people watching. At the end of the fight, both fighters stood up with their hands in the air, neither of them knowing who actually won the fight. And everybody in the place knew they had just witnessed something special. Even though Forrest Griffin was pronounced the winner of the Ultimate Fighter, both fighters were given a $100,000 contract because their fight was so crazy and so incredible. And actually is still one of the best fights in UFC history today. About that time, my phone rings, and I'm in the middle of the event, my phone rings, and I pick it up, and it's my web guy, and he's screaming in my phone, what the heck is going on? Your website's gonna crash. It's gonna go down. You're doing 3,000 orders an hour. Now, like, 3,000 orders an hour. Up until that point, we were doing about 15 orders a day. And now we're doing 3,000 orders an hour. Everything changed. TapouT finally made it. Hundreds of millions of dollars of sales would happen in the future. In 2010. In 2010, my dad called me and he said, your mom was just attacked in front of the house and she was knocked down and her purse was taken, but she's okay. And I said, Dad, you gotta get out of there. Please, it's not safe anymore. Please get out of there. And that was a couple of months before Christmas. And the day before Christmas, I went and picked him up and I told him I was taking him to a friend's house. And we drove up this hill, up to the top of this beautiful neighborhood overlooking the whole valley. And we walked up to the front door, and I reached into my pocket and I pulled out a set of keys. The keys to their new life. And they walked in their new house that was totally furnished. And they walked into their garage, and there was a brand new white Lexus in there with a big red bow around it. They'd never owned a new car in their life. They never had a new house in their life. My mom had lived in that house since she was 16 years old. You see, that's why I do what I do. That's why I couldn't let insecurity stop me. You see, this is what I was meant to do. Every single one of us are meant to do something. Don't let insecurity stop you. Don't do it. I need my kids to know this message, my 4 beautiful kids. This is the message that I have for them. My hope for all of you is that you can all achieve what your insecure self once thought was impossible. Thank you.